Welcome back to week 5. Really good to have you. Now we'll look at the second part of the 2 video series for the knowledge area requirements analysis and design definition. Let me share my screen with you. Okay, there we go. Right, so let's now continue with part 2 of these 2 videos. Just to remind you, on the value spectrum, we are very much in the middle between the potential and the actual on the continuum. So the next 3 tasks that we'll consider for this knowledge area is define requirements architecture, define design options, and analyze potential value and recommend a solution. So if we start with define requirements architecture, let's have a look at the BABOK's definition of the purpose for this particular task. So according to the BABOK, this is to ensure that the requirements collectively support one another to fully support the objectives. Now there are 5 different elements in this task for us to consider. The first is the element requirements, viewpoints, and views. Then template architectures, completeness, relate and verify requirements relationships, and business analysis information architecture. Okay, so element 1, requirements, viewpoints, and views. So let's look at what is a viewpoint. A viewpoint is a set of conventions that define how requirements will be represented, how these representations will be organized, and how they will be related. These can be coming in the format of templates, where the templates might specify the model types that will be used, the attributes that will be used to define requirements, what notations will be used, as well as how will the information be analyzed, the analytical approaches. So just keep in mind that no single viewpoint alone can form the entire architecture. So a viewpoint is almost, I'd say, like a perspective of your requirements. So all of this comes together to form an entire architecture. With element 2, so let's now look at the template architecture. So here I've included a few images of different almost viewpoints on the same architecture. So this is an architectural framework. It's basically a collection of viewpoints that is standard across an industry, sector, or organization. So you may, as an organization, or as the business analysis industry, we may have certain architectural frameworks that is followed, that is defined and agreed, and we would say, okay, for every project that we do as an organization or a BA practice, we will go and define these frameworks covering these certain viewpoints, and together it will all form our template architecture that we'll be implementing. With element 3, this is really about completeness. This is about structuring requirements according to different viewpoints, helps ensure that there is completeness. So this is basically iterations of elicitation, specification, and analysis activities can help to identify gaps. So this is really an effort to make sure that the requirements are in fact covering all the different viewpoints. Like perhaps you've got a lot of requirements for a system that wants to be built, and you may need to ensure that you've got almost like a functional viewpoint, a data viewpoint, and a process viewpoint to be very complete in the way that you define your requirements. And you should then be able to compare all of these viewpoints to ensure that it is complete across all of the different viewpoints that was defined or specified. And this process could be iterative as well. You will do this multiple times because remember, as you are eliciting requirements and then analyzing the data, creating your requirements, specifying it, modeling it. All of these activities are happening on an iterative basis, and over a period of time, you'll build up a picture or a requirements architecture that's completed, and that is in fact complete in terms of completeness as well. Element 4, we're looking at relating and verifying requirements and their relationships. So this is really where we define the relationships that exist between requirements. So what I'll do here is I'll actually refer you back to those relationships that we've discussed as part of the trace requirements task during requirements lifecycle management. Element 5, this is about the business analysis information architecture. And again, you will remember that when we started out our journey in week 1, we talked about business analysis planning and monitoring. Now, there is a task in that particular knowledge area referring to planned business analysis information management. So here we are referring back to some of that, where we're saying that the structure of business analysis information is also an information architecture. So this type of architecture is defined as part of the planned business analysis information management. I'd like you to go back to week 1 and just have a look at what that task is all about and what we were talking about when we were discussing that task. This is just another information architecture, but it's good for you to have that perspective so that you can understand what this is all about. And then the information architecture is a component of the requirements architecture because it describes how all of the business analysis information for a change relates. Okay. Now let's have a look at the task called Define Design Options. So the purpose of this task is to define the solution approach, identify opportunities to improve the business, allocate requirements across solution components, and represent design options that achieve the desired future state. So the elements here is define solution approaches, identify improvement opportunities, requirements allocation, and then describe the design options. So let's see what is this all about. So with element 1, define solution approaches. Basically, ultimately, there are 3 different types of solution approaches. One being create, that is when we decide we will just create the solution internally or from scratch. We could get someone to help us build it, but we are basically starting from scratch with our solution and creating it the way we want it. Purchasing is when we go to the market and we say, this is what we're looking for, let's purchase a solution that's already been built. But a lot of the time, your experience would say this to you, we tend to do a combination of both. Some parts of a solution might be purchased and some parts of a solution might in fact be built or customized to suit our needs. So defining solution approaches may be a combination of these 2 main different options we've got. Now, element 2 is about identify improvement opportunities. Now, there are typically, when we start working as business analysts, there are 3 different types of improvement opportunities, you could say. The first is where we find inefficiencies that we would like to try and increase the efficiencies. So we will do a lot of work in trying to optimize things. Or some of the other types of work that we'll do would be around improving access to more information. Imagine and think about all of the projects you've been involved with where that was one of the main themes, was trying to improve access to information for the users. Or we might identify additional capabilities within a particular solution that could be implemented in the future for the organization. Now, element 3, this is all about how do we plan to allocate our requirements. So we've now worked it all out, we've modeled it, we've defined it, we've got a requirements architecture, but how do we allocate the requirements? So this is basically the process of assigning requirements to solution components and releases to best achieve the objectives. Requirements may be allocated between organizational units, job functions, solution components, or the releases of a solution. So in a software development project, you might find that the most common way would be that your requirements or your user stories, as they may be referred to, would be forming part of certain iterations or releases of a solution that is planned. Or allocation typically continues through the design and implementation of a solution. So this may be quite an iterative process, it may be something that changes a little, or if it's a very waterfall-based methodology, this could be planned up front, and your requirements might be very specifically aligned with certain modules, and it could be a very staged delivery. So this is just all about how will the allocation work within your context. Element 4 is about let's describe design options. So design options are investigated and developed while considering the desired future state and in order to ensure the design options is valid. Now, do you recognize that we are now talking about the desired future state? So this is almost like taking us a little bit back to the strategy analysis aspect that we were discussing in our previous week, part of defining the future state there. So this is looking at what options are we going to look at to try and bring that future state to life. What are those solutions going to look like? We would also like to then solution performance measures. We start to think about, okay, so we've chosen 3 different design options to consider, but how will we define their performance measures? How do we measure which one will be best for us? And then a design option usually consists of many design components, each described by a design element. Now let's delve into that. So the design elements may describe, in turn, business policies or business rules, business processes to be performed and managed, people who operate and maintain the solution, including their job functions and responsibilities, operational business decisions that needs to be made, software applications and application components used in the solution, organizational structures, including interactions between the organization, its customers, and its suppliers. So these are just the different design elements that will form part, ultimately, of the design option. Okay, so now let's delve into the task, analyze potential value and recommend solution. So here we can look at the purpose of this particular task as this is to estimate the potential value for each design option and to establish which one is the most appropriate to meet the enterprise's requirements. So you'll remember that last week we looked at financial analysis. This and some of what we've done there is starting to come into this discussion. So here we are considering the elements, which is really about what's the expected benefits, what's the expected costs, how do we determine the value that we can expect, and design is options. How are we assessing that and then recommending which solution should the business go with? So first of all, if we look at element 1, the expected benefits. This is in terms of a definition, the positive value that a solution is intended to deliver to stakeholders. Now, examples could include benefits, reduced risk, compliance with regulations, and improved user experience. some of this you could see is quite intangible benefits, and some might be more measurable. But ultimately, the total expected benefit is the net benefit of all the requirements in particular design option. So that a particular design option is addressing. Benefits are often realized over a period of time. So this is when I'd like to take you back to when we were able to have more tangible benefits that was expressed in actual dollars that was expected over a period of time that we might actually get. So that's how this might nicely fit into those financial analysis calculations, and this will bring it to life for you a bit more. So with element 2, we're looking at the expected costs. So this in turn is effectively any potential negative value associated with the solution. So examples here could be a timeline, maintenance or operational costs, resources, effort, implementation costs, and those are just a few of the things that is actually an investment in terms of costs from the organization in order to implement a particular design option. Here I'm also just highlighting the concept of opportunity costs. So sometimes we choose to actually try and work this out in a way that needs to be presented as part of the different design options. And what this means is that is the alternative results that might have been achieved if the resources, time, and funds devoted to one design option has been allocated to another design option. So because we've only got one team, we've only got one pot of money, and we've only got 1 year, we have to determine, so if we go down one path, what are we losing by not going down the other path? Or what would we have lost or given up? And that's the opportunity cost that what we have sacrificed divided by what we are gaining. So that's just to keep everything in perspective. So element 3, determined value. So this is the potential value of a solution to a stakeholder based on the benefits delivered by the solution and the associated costs. So value can be positive or negative. So you might spend more than you actually get back for certain projects, but ideally we would always like to get more value, a positive value, once we've invested time and money into a particular solution. But then you've got the concept of potential value and actual value. This simply means potential value is what we are hoping to achieve by doing some estimation and kind of having certain expectations of a particular solution and course of action. However, we'll only really know what was the real cost or the real value once we've started using this particular solution option or design option. So that is referred to as the actual value. Okay. Now let's look at the last element for this task, and this is all about assessing design options and recommending the solution. So we've now considered the expected benefits, expected costs, and some of the other aspects of that. So now we want to assess the design options and recommend a solution. So each design option is assessed based on the potential value it's expected to deliver. As costs and efforts are understood by each solution component, business analysts assess each design option to ensure that it represents the most effective trade-offs. So there are several factors to consider when you do this. So you have to sometimes consider how many resources have we got available in terms of a design option. What are the constraints of a particular solution? And what dependencies do we have with our requirements? So then at the end of the day, business analysts would recommend the options or options deemed to be the most valuable solution to address the business need. So ultimately, we are saying that there are multiple dimensions to considering different solution options or design options. And we should look at it from various different lenses, looking at the potential benefits, but also looking at the potential costs and the opportunity costs, like we said. And then depending on who we are and what we've got available, we need to consider all aspects before we make a recommendation. And ultimately, we are hoping to be able to recommend the solution that meets the business need in the most optimal way with the most effective or efficient trade-offs. Okay, over to you. So we've now looked at the last three tasks of requirements analysis and design definition. There's a lot to take in, and you would see a lot more integration with some of the other knowledge areas. And this should hopefully now start to really come home to you that the BABOK guide is a collection of organized information, but it all really interrelates. And things happen at the same time, things support each other, and you should treat it and get to know it in that way. And this way you'll get the most value out of the BABOK guide. All right, so raise any questions about this topic in the Facebook group. Give us any examples you think might be valuable. And yes, let's go have a conversation and stay in touch with everyone. Don't be shy, please participate. And anything exam-wise that you could share, please do that as well. Thank you. It was great talking to you.